Monday, May 5th, dawns gray and bleak in a cold, hard downpour that continues from the previous night. It is soon apparent to General Joseph E. Johnston that his supply trains and artillery will take a long time moving any distance on the single muddy road leading out of Williamsburg towards Richmond. He will have to buy time for them to escape. The commands of David R. Jones, Gustavus W. Smith, and D. H. Hill are set in motion. Longstreet's division will act as a rearguard to block pursuit. It is Longstreet's good fortune that at Williamsburg he has a good place to make a defensive fight. The Virginia Peninsula here is only 7 miles wide, and the area Longstreet has to defend is further narrowed by the courses of two streams, Queens Creek and College Creek. The area between them is barely 3 miles wide. Indeed, in Major General John Magruder's original plan for defending the peninsula, Williamsburg was designated his fallback position should he not obtain enough men to hold the Warwick River line or if the Yankees broke through there. To that end, during the winter he had constructed a large earthen redoubt, which he privately named Fort Magruder, which commanded the junction of the Yorktown and Lee's Mill roads in front of Williamsburg, and 13 small redoubts and redans to cover the rest of the shallow V of open ground that ran west to College Creek and east-southeast to Queens Creek. To enlarge the defenders' field of fire and hamper in attacking force, a wide belt of timber was felled to form a tangled slashing, in military terminology, an abattis. Along the face of the woodland fronting this line, it is a very ugly place to have to attack. The two Federal infantry divisions ordered to pursue the Army of Northern Virginia on May 4th, Brigadier General Joseph Fighting Joe Hooker's 2nd Division of 3rd Corps and Brigadier General William F. Baldy Smith's 2nd Division of 4th Corps, have labored through the bad stretches of road cut up by the guns and wagons of the retreating Confederates, and only catch up with Brigadier General Jones Stoneman's cavalry advance guard after dark. Hooker on Lee's Mill Road and Smith on the Yorktown Road are not within mutual supporting distance. However, rather than coming together at a narrow angle, the two roads turn sharply towards each other and meet at a virtual 90-degree angle, and with the junction under the rebels' guns, Hooker and Smith at their closest are still a good mile apart and separated by swampy and impenetrable woods. They might as well have been on different battlefields, as would soon become evident. Like the Confederates, the Union Army forces have awakened early after a long, wet night. Most of the high command of the Army of the Potomac had found dry, comfortable quarters in the Whitaker House, and at first light, Brigadier General Edwin V. Bull Sumner, the senior ranking general from the Army of the Potomac in the field at Williamsburg, finds his way back to his command. Soon, General Joseph Hooker has his 1st Brigade under Brigadier General Cuvier Grover marching up Lee's Mill Road, which is lined with dense forest for about a half mile, then with felled trees for another half mile. By 5:30 a.m., the Bluecoats are within sight of Fort Magruder and the field in front of it. Hooker muses that the landscape is picturesque as he gazes through the morning mist, and not a little heightened by the large trees and venerable spires of Williamsburg, 2 miles distant. The men of Hooker's division are looking across a field partially sown in wheat, 600 or 700 yards wide from the felled trees to the fort. From their viewpoint, the redoubts are standing near the eastern and southern verge of a slightly elevated plain, the slopes of which are furrowed with winding ravines, with an almost boundless, gently undulating plain reaching across the peninsula and extending to the north and west as far as the eye can reach. Behind the redoubts, the force again extended its cover, an opening only at the section through which Williamsburg is approached. A northern correspondent accompanying Hooker believes the field admirably adapted for the conventional panorama, which such as the one in pictures sees of a field engagement. The Yankees have little time to admire the scenery, however, for they are soon spotted by rebel horsemen in the field as soon as their blue uniforms emerge from the woods. Instantly, the men in Fort Magruder are alerted. Brigadier General Richard H. Anderson is where General Longstreet had left him in the night before. In charge of the redoubts with his brigade and Brigadier General Roger A. Pryor's brigade and parts of 3 artillery batteries, they are mostly South Carolina men, with a battalion of troops from the Louisiana Foot Rifles under Captain McGavock Godwin occupying the fort and the redoubts immediately to the left and right. The 4th South Carolina Infantry Battalion under Major Charles S. Madison is sent out as skirmishers to meet the threat coming up the Hampton Road. Before they are able to cross the field, Hooker swiftly deploys his regiments through the felled timber, directing the 1st Massachusetts under Colonel Robert Cowden to the left of the road and Colonel Gilman Marston's 2nd New Hampshire to the right. Hooker gives his orders to Grover regarding the 1st Massachusetts and 2nd New Hampshire. They are to skirmish to the edge of the felled timber, drive back the rebel skirmish line, then under cover to turn their attention to the occupants of the rifle pits and the enemy sharpshooters and gunners in Fort Magruder. At first, the South Carolinians, reinforced by the Palmetto sharpshooters under Colonel Micah Jenkins, are successful in their efforts to press back the Northerners back into the woods. But when the 1st Massachusetts and 2nd New Hampshire regiments fully deploy into line of battle, they are overpowering, and within a half hour the Confederates are driven back into the fort. The opening shots of the Battle of Williamsburg, or Battle of Fort Magruder, fired by Federal and Rebel muskets just before 7 a.m. on Monday, May 5, 1862. This marks the start of the first pitched battle of the Peninsula Campaign. At 7 o'clock that morning, General Hooker and his artillery chief, Major Charles S. Wainwright, go on foot up the road to the edge of the forest to reconnoiter and to locate a position for the divisional artillery. The only open space they can find is the road itself and an old cornfield on the right that faces the junction of the Lee's Mill and Yorktown roads, and beyond that, Fort Magruder. Hooker believes his 1st Brigade, already skirmishing in and behind the slashing of felled trees, can protect the guns, and Wainwright orders up to 6 pieces of Battery H 1st U.S. Artillery. As the regulars splash forward in the mud and rain and unlimber, the Confederate gunners in Fort Magruder and the adjoining redoubts open fire on them. Serving as acting commander on the field in the absence of Major General McClellan, who is still in Yorktown, Brigadier General Edwin V. Bull Sumner first gets the indication that the battle is on when he hears the sounds of the guns off to his left beyond the thick, misty forest. Battery H, 1st U.S. Artillery, has been under fire before, at the Battle of Fort Sumter in the war's first hours, but that experience had been bloodless. This is more its true baptism of fire, and very different. Even as the batteries take in position, men and horses are shot down, and suddenly the gun crews are seized by an unreasoning panic and dive for cover. Major Wainwright thinks how it is a miserable beginning to his first battle. Never in my life was I so mortified, never so excited, never so mad. He rages at the cowering gunners and whacks them with the flat of his saber, even driving some of them back to the guns at sword's point, but nothing can keep them there. In desperation, he spurs back to his reserve, a New York battery that had been his first command, and pleads with the gunners to save them from disgrace. He is rewarded by a rush of volunteers, and in minutes, the guns of Battery H are manned and pouring shot and shell into Fort Magruder. The enemy's fire slackens. As the rest of his infantry arrives at the front, Hooker pushes most of it into the woods and the abattis west of Lee's Mill Road, and Major Wainwright orders up reinforcements until he has 10 guns posted in the road and in the old cornfield to the east. At about 8 a.m., it suddenly occurs to General Hooker that he has almost no knowledge of the land or the whereabouts of the rest of the Union Army, placing him in a position to be easily outflanked. Thus, he orders General Grover to extend the 1st Massachusetts to the left and place the 11th Massachusetts and the 26th Pennsylvania regiments to the right of the 2nd New Hampshire in an effort to reach the Yorktown Road. He also wants the Pennsylvanians to communicate with Sumner's men, who are supposed to be forming the center of the Union line directly facing in front of Fort Magruder. More concerned about the exposure of his left flank, Hooker sends an engineering officer, Lieutenant Miles D. McAllister, followed by the 1st Brigade of Stoneman's Cavalry under Brigadier General William H. Emery to reconnoiter the ground. A drifting of gray uniforms towards the left can be discerned through the pouring rain, which intermittently falls in torrents on the two opposing forces. And so, Hooker sends his 3rd Brigade of New Jersey regiments under Brigadier General Francis E. Patterson into action. The 5th New Jersey is held in support of the batteries on the right, while the 6th, 7th, and 8th New Jersey are led through the dense forest to the left. Here, the New Jersey regiments form into line of battle with the 6th New Jersey to the right of the 7th, and the 8th New Jersey coming up on the extreme left. No sooner do the New Jersey regiments form into line than they are attacked by a rushing gray mass. This is the 19th Mississippi of Brigadier General Cadmus M. Wilcox's brigade. Wilcox's brigade had been ordered by Brigadier General Anderson to occupy the woods, and so the men had exited Redoubt 4 and crossed the field through a ravine that protected them from enemy fire. The woods, the Mississippians discover upon entering, are so dense that the colonel cannot see his entire regiment when in line of battle. The woods are so full of New Jersey boys who offer a spiritual resistance. Part of Wilcox's 9th and 10th Alabama regiments had followed the 19th Mississippi across the field and now joined in the fight, taking cover in the thick underbrush to the left and right of the Mississippians. Wilcox, now aware of the Federal strength, dispatches a request to Brigadier General Ambrose Powell Hill, or AP Hill, for reinforcements. This message is intercepted by Brigadier General Jeb Stuart, who has no particular assigned duties for the day and starts making himself useful as the ranking messenger boy. Stuart delivers Wilcox's request to the closest brigadier at hand, General Pryor, who has most of his brigade scattered among 4 redoubts, but he promises to send what he can find. Pryor manages to gather the 14th Louisiana under Colonel Richard W. Jones and part of the 8th Alabama under Lieutenant Colonel Thomas E. Irby, and leads them to the right of Wilcox's brigade. Irby's men are ordered to watch the extreme right of the line for any flanking movement. Meanwhile, Hooker is also busy scrambling for reinforcements. With 2 of his 3 brigades already deployed, Hooker has only his 2nd Brigade, nicknamed the Excelsior Brigade, and made up of New York regiments under Colonel Nelson Taylor, to call upon. Of these, only the 72nd New York is handy and ready for deployment, and so it is thrown in to relieve the 1st Massachusetts, which by now is almost out of ammunition, and to cover Patterson's right flank. General Grover hopes that the fresh troops can silence a Confederate battery that is annoying them from Redoubt 3 to their left, but with Patterson too busy to support them, they try in vain. Hooker sends requests to General Sumner on his right and Brigadier General Philip Bill Kearny's 3rd Division still far to his rear, but the ever-deepening mud denies him both the men and ammunition he so desperately needs. While the Union generals ponder their next move, the Confederate generals seize the initiative and make the decision for them. The Battle of Williamsburg is over 4 hours old, yet neither army has gained a substantial advantage or has lost any ground. The bulk of the Confederate army is still trying to make its way to Richmond under the direction of General Johnston, who remains in Williamsburg. But the Confederate baggage trains, still stuck in the mud, continue to hinder the march, and so General Longstreet decides that he can make battle without delaying the movement of our army. Therefore, Major General Longstreet orders Anderson to organize columns of attack upon the enemy's positions and batteries, using the brigades of Wilcox and AP Hill and such of his forces as could be spared from the redoubts. The attack to be supported by Pickett's brigade. Brigadier General AP Hill has his brigade waiting on the road between the town and Fort Magruder since early that morning, ready to support Anderson when needed. Responding to Longstreet's order, he then forms his Virginia regiments, the 1st, 7th, 11th, and 17th Virginia, in line behind redoubts 2, 3, and 4. Brigadier General George E. Pickett's brigade has started marching from its bivouac behind the College of William and Mary towards Richmond at 8 a.m., but it was soon halted and hurriedly backtracked through the town towards the battle. Anderson leaves Fort Magruder in the hands of Colonel Micah Jenkins of the Palmetto Sharpshooters and goes to the right flank to direct operations personally. From there, he orders AP Hill into the woods to form to the right of Wilcox, and at 11 o'clock gives the signal for a general attack. The heaviest fighting of the Battle of Williamsburg is about to erupt in the portion of the battlefield now known to history as the Bloody Ravine. The 7th Virginia of A.P. Hill's brigade leads the way into the dense tangle of brush, undergrowth, and vines, firing their rifles and muskets blindly in the direction in which the minette balls seem to come their way. The invisible Federals return a heavy fire that melt into the forest before the yelling rebels can catch up to them. Halting behind a fence, the 7th Virginia is joined by the 11th Virginia on its right and rear, the 17th Virginia on its left and rear, and the 1st Virginia, temporarily under Wilcox's command, on their extreme left, forming behind the 9th Alabama. Presently, dark blue uniforms are seen moving about the trees to their left, and when the Confederates open fire on them, they coalesce into a line. For many of the Virginians gazing at the scene, the long stretch of glittering steel, with a head bent down at the end of each gun barrel, is a thrilling sight. A huge cloud of smoke hides the enemy from their view, and a tremendous report rings through the forest following the volley. Another charge is ordered, and the Virginians spring over the fence, forcing back the Northerners step by step. As they continue to press forward, Hill's Virginians are followed by Pickett's own. Pickett's brigade spreads along the line, with the 8th Virginia on the extreme right flank and the 18th and 19th Virginia on the left to relieve part of Wilcox's brigade. Brigadier General Pickett holds the 28th Virginia in reserve, slightly behind the 18th and 19th until Wilcox puts it in to support his 19th Mississippi. With this added strength, the Confederates sweep through the misty woods, continuing to drive the Federals back. The forest floor is strewn with the Union dead and wounded, clumped in places where they had tried to stand and fight. When the Virginians reach the edge of the woods, the fire slackens. They pause to replenish their ammunition in knapsacks from the fallen enemy and administer what comfort they can to the wounded. As they rest, they can watch the smoke of the previous combat slowly drifting out of the forest and rising like a thin veil between themselves and the enemy. Through the haze can be seen a long line of infantry, splendidly equipped and motionless as their regimental and national flags flap in the rain. This new Union regiment is the 70th New York under Colonel William Dwight, which Hooker has sent in to relieve the exhausted 3rd Brigade in the 72nd New York. The 11th Virginia on the 7th Virginia's right is expecting more gray uniforms rather than blue to appear in that direction in the hazy, misty rainfall, and so the Virginians loudly demand that the New Yorkers show their colors. A volley from the 7th Virginia passes over the heads of Colonel Dwight's men, and the 70th New York levels their rifles and opens fire no more than 60 yards away. The 17th Virginia comes up to the 7th's left, and together, the two regiments fix bayonets and charge, pushing the Yankees back to a field of felled timber. Here, both sides duck down behind the twisted limbs and blast away at one another for several hours. The lines fluctuate back and forth as either side gains temporary advantages over the other, clambering over the felled timber with charges and countercharges. The men of the 7th Virginia complain when the Union colonel makes some of his best shots crawl under the timber and begins picking off the rebels. Old-fashioned buck and ball cartridges are amazingly deadly at this short range of about 30 yards. But when the ammunition begins to give out, Colonel Dwight reports that this skulking contest from opposite sides of the logs in front of my main body became in some cases hand-to-hand. It is now 1 p.m., and in General Hooker's words, the battle had swollen to one of gigantic proportions. In desperation, he has already thrown in the last of his reserves, the 73rd and 74th New York, and has pulled the 11th Massachusetts to the left to aid the Excelsior Brigade. The 26th Pennsylvania is also ordered to the left, but the aide's horse is shot from under him while carrying the messenger, and so the regiment is ignorant of their new orders and remains on the right of Hooker's line in front of Fort Magruder. After the withdrawal of the 11th Massachusetts, the South Carolina troops take advantage of the weakened line and charge out of Redoubt 6. Battery H, 1st U.S. Artillery, with the 4 guns unsupported by infantry and deeply stuck in the mud, is easily seized. Captain Thomas W. Osborne's Battery D, 1st New York Light Artillery, along with Captain James E. Smith's 4th New York Battery, and Captain Walter M. Bromhall's 6th New York Battery come under heavy fire by the Confederate guns in Fort Magruder. A member of the 74th New York declared that the Confederate artillery made terrible havoc among the forest, much more than among our men. Tree tops drop off as though they had been heads severed from human bodies by the keenest sword. While the artillery thunders away around the Bloody Ravine, the Confederate infantry is faced with a sudden shortage of ammunition, as the supply trains are still mired out of reach. The only way to replenish ammo is bringing in fresh troops. Longstreet accordingly directs Brigadier General Raleigh E. Colston's brigade to back up A.P. Hill's brigade by filling in the vacated redoubts, and he recalls D.H. Hill's division, which had waded but a few miles through the mud and slush towards Richmond that morning. Only 2 of D.H. Hill's units, the 2nd Florida Infantry Regiment and the 2nd Mississippi Infantry Battalion, are sent to the right, the remainder being placed in reserve behind the woods to the left and rear of Fort Magruder. General Johnston visits Longstreet on the field about this time, approximately 1:30 p.m., but finding the situation well in hand, declines with his usual magnanimity to assume command. If orders prevail behind the lines, the front lines apparently present another scene, described by one Confederate soldier as pandemonium broke loose. It seems to me that if brass pieces fairly howled while the roll of small arms are something indescribable, ordinarily heavy musketry rises and falls like the sounds of the sea, but here it was one deep, incessant, prolonged, deafening roar. This tremendous din, along with the periodic torrential downpours which reduces visibility and leaves the men soaked and caked with mud, contributes to a general confusion among the ranks. The 8th Virginia from Pickett's brigade, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Norborne Berkeley, enters the woods before the other 3 regiments of the brigade can follow. Pickett's other regiments are soon recalled, leaving the 8th Virginia to proceed alone. There, on the right flank, together with the 14th Louisiana Prior's Brigade, the 8th Virginia repulses several attacks by the 70th New York, drawing praise from Brigadier General Pickett for their performance under fire. While Hooker's 2nd Division of 3rd Corps is fighting the entire battle alone, General Sumner holds Brigadier General Smith's 2nd Division of 4th Corps in reserve less than 2 miles to Hooker's right. There, idle troops stand behind a screen of woods, waiting for an attack that Sumner expects on the center from Fort Magruder. All the while, Hooker is pleading for reinforcements, which goes unheeded. Brigadier General Silas Casey's 3rd Division and Darius Encounter's 1st Division of 4th Corps are strung out along the muddy Yorktown Road from the halfway house to the Whitaker House, paralyzed by more conflicting orders from high command than by the weather. With an earshot of the battle, they are willing but unable to help. Finally, about 1 p.m., Brigadier General John J. Peck's 3rd Brigade of Couch's Division manages to pass Casey's division, which was halted only 1.5 miles from the front lines, and arrives behind Hooker's right. Here, General Peck encounters the men of the 26th Pennsylvania, who inform him that their ammunition is getting low. After receiving a message from Hooker, Peck rapidly deploys his regiments on either side of the Yorktown Road. The 102nd Pennsylvania Regiment goes to the right, and the 55th New York to the left, with the 62nd New York on the far left. Watching these fresh Union troops deploy, Jeb Stuart hastily orders his horse artillery under the command of 21-year-old Captain John Pelham to unlimber in front of Fort Magruder. The battery's rapid fire of shot, shell, and canister pushes back Peck's left center, which has to be strengthened with the 93rd Pennsylvania, and it belches enough smoke to screen a rebel infantry charge. The 102nd Pennsylvania begins to waver, prompting Peck to lead his last regiment, the 98th Pennsylvania, to repel the attack. Since the Confederate troops engaged with Peck's 3rd Brigade are primarily the South Carolinians from Fort Magruder, no rebels have actually been diverted from Hooker's front, so his petitions for help continue to flow into the Whitaker House. By mid-afternoon, morale in Hooker's 2nd Division has sunken to its lowest ebb. Many who exhaust their ammunition simply throw down the rifles and struggle to the rear, or carry the wounded to the rear and do not bother to rejoin the regiments. In an effort to instill some cheer, Brigadier General Heintzelman orders the drums to beat, but they are wet and do not give forth any cheerful sounds according to the soldiers. So General Heintzelman hunts around, finds 3 musicians, and orders them to play Yankee Doodle, but the musicians refuse on the grounds that they are only part of a band. Heintzelman then hurries around for more musicians, finds elements of another band, unites them to the professional 3, and electrifies the worn-out infantry by having them play the tunes of The Star-Spangled Banner, Yankee Doodle, and Gem of the Ocean. Though the music can drown out the din of battle and the shrieks of the wounded, it is unable to hold back the onrushing rebel tide. After doggedly holding their position in the felled timber for more than 2 hours without relief, the men of the 70th New York can no longer defend themselves with bayonets against a determined Confederate charge. The added strength of Colson's brigade and the 2nd Florida Regiment and the 2nd Mississippi Battalion pushes the line forward in a final assault. Colonel Dwight of the 70th New York is wounded twice before being captured along with many of his regiment's survivors. Meanwhile, many of the Gray soldiers become separated from the regiments in the attack, and so they halt to regroup. Stuart, mistaking it for a rout, boldly leads a charge with his cavalry brigade across the lines, where he encounters a wall of new blue uniforms emerging from the woods. At last, Brigadier General Philip Kearny's 3rd Division has arrived on the field. After wading to their knees through the mud and crowds of stalled troops and trains since 9 o'clock that morning, Brigadier General Kearny's troops are within 3.5 miles of the battlefield by 1 p.m. They pause briefly to rest and deposit their heavy knapsacks, then continue towards the front. In another hour, they are within 1 mile of the engagement at the Bloody Ravine. Perceiving Hooker's desperate situation, General Kearny immediately deploys his leading brigade, Brigadier General Hiram G. Berry's 3rd Brigade, to the left of Lee's Mill Road, with the men of the 2nd Michigan under Colonel Orlando M. Poe straddling the road as skirmishers. The troops of Colonel Henry D. Terry's 5th Michigan, with Colonel Samuel B. Hayman's 37th New York, extending further to the left into the timber. Brigadier General David B. Birney has his 2nd Brigade follow up the deployment and places Colonel J. H. Hubbard's Ward's 38th New York and Colonel Edward J. Riley's 40th New York regiments to the right of the road. As the fresh troops are cheered into the battle by the music of General Heintzelman's band, they pass remnants of Hooker's spent division stumbling back to the rear. There, the 5th New Jersey reforms, and though terribly decimated, returns to the front. When all the men from his 3rd Division are in line of battle, General Kearny orders the Michiganders to fix bayonets and charge. The Michigan regiments promptly recapture the lost battery and chase the Confederates out of their advanced position in the woods and back through the felled timber. The 37th New York holds the extreme left with a continuous fire into the felled timber, while the 38th New York, supported by the 40th New York, charges down the Lee's Mill Road. As they drive through the trees and into the rifle pits, many men are slashed by the dense foliage and have their clothing torn to shreds. Before darkness falls upon the battlefield of the Bloody Ravine, both armies have returned to the approximate lines they had occupied around noon. While the deadly tug-of-war match continues around the Bloody Ravine throughout the afternoon, other Union troops are ranging on the flanks as far as the rivers. Earlier in the day, Hooker had sent Emory with the cavalry and horse artillery to the left to reconnoiter and occupy the ground between the Union left and the James River. Probing around the extreme Confederate right, the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry penetrates as far as Redoubt No. 1. When General Heintzelman arrives in the afternoon, he orders Emory down the Lee's Mill Road to a crossroad that leads to the James River. There, the cavalrymen meet Lieutenant Miles D. McAllister, who had been scouting the area, and he guides them up another road and across a mill dam where they halt. Emory feels he is not strong enough to continue any further up this road, which leads to the rear of the Confederate right, so he calls for infantry support. About 4 p.m., 3 regiments that Heintzelman has detached from Kearny's division arrive, but they are too little too late. Thus, the Yankees miss their opportunity to cut off the rebel retreat at Williamsburg by penetrating the extreme Confederate right flank. However, on the extreme Union right flank, events are moving towards a climax. The drama had begun early that morning when 16 local contrabands, escaped slaves running to the Union lines, wander into the Union camps from the neighboring farms. Sumner questions them, and though the stories do not at all agree, they encourage the belief that some of the enemy's works on their left are not occupied as they had been the afternoon before. A captain of the engineers is detailed to make a reconnaissance, and he learns from another former slave about the road over Cub Creek Dam near Redoubt No. 14. Sumner detaches Brigadier General Winfield Scott Hancock's 1st Brigade from Baldy Smith's 2nd Division and sends them with 5 infantry regiments and a battery of artillery to cross the dam. Smith authorizes Hancock to advance as far as he thinks advantageous, promising him reinforcements: the 5th Wisconsin, 49th Pennsylvania, 33rd New York, and the 6th and 7th Maine, along with Captain Charles C. Willard's Battery E, 1st New York Light Artillery, made up of 6 guns, march towards the York River and up the dam within sight of the redoubt. Here, they meet Brigadier General Erasmus D. Keyes, commander of 4th Corps, making his own reconnaissance of the area, and he promises to send Hancock some cavalry support. Not certain that the earthworks are truly vacant, Hancock cautiously places his battery on the crest of an overlooking hill, deploys skirmishers to either side of the road, and sends the 5th Wisconsin and 6th Maine regiments in column of assault over the dam and into the redoubt. A young Federal cavalry officer, 1st Lieutenant George Armstrong Custer, instinctively searching for the most glory-soaked field, is the first man to take possession of the enemy-deserted stronghold. Leaving a few troops to protect his rear, Hancock sends back for reinforcements and repeats the same deployment pattern to take quiet possession of the next redoubt. This is Redoubt No. 11, and from the crest before it, Hancock can plainly see a mile across the open fields of Fort Magruder and the redoubts in between occupied by their rightful owners. He immediately sets up his artillery to either side and throws out skirmishers and flankers to prepare for an assault on the nearest Confederate redoubt as soon as the promised reinforcements arrive. But instead of the 4 regiments and 1 battery Smith had mentioned, only 4 guns rumble up, unlimber in front of the redoubt, and commence firing on Fort Magruder. This alerts Colonel Jenkins, still in command of the fort, to the Union threat on his left flank. Colonel John Bratton with the 6th South Carolina Infantry Regiment is immediately ordered to join the companies already occupying redoubts 9 and 10, and Fort Magruder's guns swing around to support him. The short engagement that follows decides nothing, Hancock hesitating to press without reinforcements, and Bratton losing his artillery support as it is diverted back to the main battle at the Bloody Ravine. Thus, the opposing commanders send out skirmishers to the surrounding woods and settle down to a glaring contest while sharpshooters practice their trade and Hancock's artillery continues to throw an occasional shell into Fort Magruder. The 5th Wisconsin forms to the right of the battery, partially screened by some farm buildings, and the 6th Maine and 49th Pennsylvania stand to the battery's left. The 7th Maine is designated to protect Hancock's right flank in the woods between them and Williamsburg, while the 49th Pennsylvania is also responsible for the less threatening woods on the redoubt's left. The bulk of the 33rd New York remains in the redoubt itself. By now it is 2 p.m. Hancock again sends a staff officer back to headquarters, urging in stronger terms the importance of promptly reinforcing him. In reply, Sumner orders him to withdraw to the relative safety of Redoubt No. 14. Lieutenant Custer stands by, watching General Hancock grow increasingly more impatient and profane. Rather than comply, Hancock decides to send back yet another messenger and to wait until 4 o'clock. If no reply reaches me from headquarters, he confides in Custer, I will then withdraw. But when 4 p.m. arrives and still no reply to a 4th staff officer dispatched at a gallop, Hancock stalls another half hour, and then another. His entire brigade staff is in the rear trying to explain the importance of the position and the need for immediate help. Well aware that disobedience of Sumner's order could ruin his military career, Hancock is confident that in any minute the reinforcements will arrive. However, it is in vain hope on Hancock's part. Each time one of his urgent dispatches is sent into headquarters at the Whitaker House, Smith would turn to Sumner for permission to send in his 2nd Brigade under Brigadier General William T.H. Brooks. The first time, Sumner grants it, but then countermands the order just before Brooks gets underway, on the grounds that he wants to hold them in reserve for Hooker. When General Smith later renews his petition, Sumner flatly refuses, having already decided to order Hooker to retire. Finally, Sumner changes his mind and orders Smith to Hancock's aid, but he then again revokes the order after Brooks has marched halfway to the redoubts. Though Smith, as a subordinate officer, has no choice but to accept Sumner's judgment, others more loosely connected with the army are at liberty to express their opinions. One such observer is a Frenchman serving on Hooker's staff, François d'Orléans, Prince of Jeanville, the 3rd son of former King Louis Philippe I. Earlier in the day, the prince rode to Yorktown, where he reportedly told Major General McClellan, "General, you have 3 old women in the advance," presumably referring to Sumner, Heintzelman, and Keyes. Little Mac is busy supervising the transport of Brigadier General William B. Franklin's 1st Division of 1st Corps up the York River to West Point, Virginia, where he hopes to cut off the Confederate retreat before Richmond. McClellan has no time to come to Williamsburg to take command until the arrival of William Sprague IV, the governor of Rhode Island, who had attached himself to the Army of the Potomac to look after his state troops. All day, Governor Sprague had watched and discussed as Sumner refused to support his generals, so he rode to Yorktown to impress upon McClellan that things were not going well on the front. Persuaded at last, General McClellan mounts his trusty warhorse Dan Webster, orders 2 divisions of Sumner's 2nd Corps to follow him, and take off at a gallop towards Williamsburg. The slushy road often forces them into the woods and brush, but McClellan's steed Dan Webster, earning his nickname That Devil Dan, covers the 12 miles in an hour, and they arrive at the Whitaker House shortly before 5 p.m. There, General McClellan finds everything, in his words, in a state of chaos and depression. The troops were weary and discouraged, but my presence at once restored their confidence. With the men's cheering still ringing in his ears, Little Mac calls a conference of his generals and orders Smith to support Hancock at last. Accordingly, General Brooks sets out once again, for the 3rd time that day. Accompanying Brooks is the 1st Brigade of Silas Casey's 3rd Division, 4th Corps, led by Brigadier General Henry Morris Nagley, who had suffered throughout the day as much from the weather from Sumner's vacillation. He was camped all morning on the Yorktown Road, a few miles below the Whitaker House. In the early afternoon, General Nagley received a verbal order from Sumner to bring his brigade up to the house, but he was then instructed to support Hooker. They ride back at headquarters just as McClellan is reining in, and so off they march again amidst the pelting rain, with the mud to their ankles, at a double-quick step to support Hancock. Meanwhile, the Confederates had become more aware of the threat on their left flank. As D.H. Hill waits in a wheat field to the left of Fort Magruder with the bulk of his division, he and Brigadier General Jubal Anderson Early hear the intermittent rumbling of Union artillery through a screen of woods in front of them. But having recently arrived on the field, neither Hill nor Early have any idea of the battery's exact position. Anxious to get into the fight, the 2 generals make a quick reconnaissance of the wood's edge, and while Hill goes off to ask Longstreet's permission to attack, Early forms his brigade line in the field. General Early's pet regiment, the 24th Virginia, is placed on the extreme left of the brigade line. To its right are 2 green regiments, the 38th Virginia and the 23rd North Carolina, and the veteran 5th North Carolina under Colonel Duncan K. McRae holds the extreme right position of Early's brigade. Brigadier General Gabriel J. Rains forms his brigade and some artillery behind Early's brigade to cover any possible retreat. With a vague gesture towards the woods, Early tells his men that they are to assault and capture a battery over there, and instructs them to load their weapons and fix bayonets. Longstreet hesitates to grant Hill permission for the assault, since he believes it unnecessary so late in the battle and is afraid it might delay their movement towards Richmond. Apparently, Longstreet is as ignorant of the exact location of the battery as Hill and Early. Nobody thinks to consult Colonel Bratton, who has been keeping a close watch on the Union-held redoubt for the past 2 hours. Nevertheless, after conferring with General Johnston, who is then on the field, Longstreet orders Hill to go ahead with the attack, but to fill the enemy with caution. Returning to Early's brigade, D.H. Hill takes his place on the right of the 5th North Carolina, while Early leads his old regiment on the left. Hill gives a command to march forward, but Early is unable to hear it, and so does not get the Virginia regiments started until after the North Carolinians are in motion. After crossing the wheat field, they penetrate the woods, where miry ground, the dense and tangled underbrush, dripping wet in the large fallen timber, somewhat impair the line's movement. But the Confederates press on at a full half-mile through the pine forest, down a hill, across a country road, and up another slope of woods. By this point, the formation has become hopelessly broken, and all communication between the regiments lost. Each regiment is now on its own. By shortly after 5 p.m., Brigadier General Hancock has still not received reinforcements or further word from Sumner or Baldy Smith. The action on the right of Fort Magruder has nearly ceased, so he finally decides to retire with the now drenching rain providing him cover. No sooner does Hancock send the order to his outlying regiments to pull back to the crest of the redoubt than he hears skirmishing to his right. In a movement, gray uniforms begin pouring out of the rainy woods. At first, Hancock believes it is Confederate cavalry, as the Union soldiers are unused to seeing mounted officers leading at the front. But the attackers are Brigadier General Early and the 24th Virginia, who had reached the edge of the woods first. Before them lies an open plain with Colonel Bratton's redoubts on their far right and Fort Magruder beyond them. To their left is Hancock's redoubt, and to their immediate front stands a cluster of farmhouses and the Union battery. With scarcely a pause, the 24th Virginia charges out of the woods, over a fence and into the field, towards the battery in the 5th Wisconsin, which instantly opens fire with a concentrated volley. General Early is hit in the shoulder, forcing him to retire on his wounded horse. In the face of this determined onslaught, General Hancock immediately orders the guns and all supporting regiments to withdraw to the crest of the redoubt. The 6th Maine, closest to the battery on its left, stops halfway to cover the 49th Pennsylvania, which coolly marches back to the crest at the parade step, faces front, and dresses its line. The guns from Captain Willer's Battery E, 1st New York Light Artillery, limber up and fall back as quickly as the thick mud will allow. The 5th Wisconsin, which has formed square to repel an assault, now slowly retreats in line of battle, turning and firing at each step. Another wave of gray-clad troops suddenly rise in the distance as the 5th North Carolina debouches from the woods. Hill had halted it at a stream in the woods to reform the line, but before he could find the regiments to his left, he heard shouting and firing immediately to his front, in a voice which he took to be General Early's, above all the uproar crying, "Follow me!" In response to this, he sends Colonel McRae with the 5th North Carolina forward into the field, where instead of the Union battery they find Colonel Bratton's redoubts filled with perplexed South Carolinians. Because the Union positions out of sight behind a spur of woods, some confused companies charge into these works, much to Colonel Bratton's consternation. McRae marches his men forward until they can see the enemy battery, where suddenly they realize they are alone. The 23rd North Carolina and 38th Virginia, which should be filling the field to their left between them and the 24th Virginia, are nowhere to be seen. McRae begins to doubt he is in the right place, so he dispatches an aide to General Hill asking which battery he is supposed to attack. Hill sends back word to McRae to charge the battery which has opened on us and do it quickly. Immediately, Colonel McRae left Oblique's regiment and marches it several hundred yards through a soft and lumpy open field under constant artillery fire. 3 color bearers for the 5th North Carolina fall dead or wounded before a 4th man has the flagstaff shivered to pieces in his hands. One of General Early's aides frantically waves on the 5th North Carolina as it struggles through the mud and withering fire. For the 24th Virginia is also suffering terribly, losing most of its officers and nearly a third of its men. By the time Colonel McRae reaches the Virginians, he and the Major of the 24th are the only field officers still mounted on horseback. In the midst of this resolute charge by the Early's brigade, Brigadier General Hancock manages to gather most of his men into a second battle line. The guns unlimber in the rear, halfway to the dam, and each company of Hancock's brigade fights its way back to the redoubt. Hancock forms a brigade along the fortifications' rim and flank. All the men are assembled around the redoubt just as the 24th Virginia comes under the crest within 30 paces of the Union line, and the 5th North Carolina has taken cover behind a split rail fence to the Virginians' right flank within 100 yards of the redoubt. At that moment, Major General Hill's orders to retire reaches both Confederate regiments, and Hancock simultaneously orders a fixed bayonet charge down the slope. Hancock noted, a few of the leading spirits of the enemy were bayoneted. The 24th Virginia angles to its left and disappears into the nearby misty woods. The North Carolinians, being too far from the woods, are exposed to the deadly Union volleys and the retreat back across the field. As the 5th North Carolina falls back, they leave their tattered battle flag and nearly 3/4 of their men behind. General Hancock, still reluctant to press the attack without further reinforcements, halts his brigade's charge at the foot of the slope and observes that the plunging fire from the redoubt, the direct fire from the right, and the oblique fire from the left were so destructive that after it had been ordered to cease fire and the smoke arose, it seemed that no man had left the ground unhurt who had advanced within 500 yards of our line. The entire charge and countercharge has only taken about 33 minutes. Meanwhile, Major General Hill goes off through the woods in search of his lost regiments from Early's brigade. He finds the 38th Virginia huddled up in confusion, and the 23rd North Carolina is idly milling behind a rail fence. These regiments he orders to form to the left and sweep the woods for Yankees, some flankers of the 33rd New York having penetrated the position. However, Hill finds that these men now under his personal command are poorly drilled and do not execute what he deems a simple maneuver efficiently enough to please the general. Colonel Bratton, who had begged General Early for a place in the charge, is having trouble forming his 6th South Carolina, and Hill's best efforts are unable to move the South Carolinians up in time to support the engaged regiments. Contrary to Hill's orders, the 38th Virginia emerges from the woods and joins the 6th South Carolina on the slow march towards the battlefront. The 23rd North Carolina simply halts in the woods, further infuriating General Hill. Both Colonel McRae and Brigadier General Early are certain that the assault would have been successful had they been reinforced by these stray regiments. Brigadier General Hancock has similar complaints. No sooner has the last shot of the battle been fired when Baldy Smith arrives on the field, followed by Brooks, Nagley, and 2 other regiments. Together, these men of the 2nd Division encamp for the night around the saturated redoubts 11 and 14. The Battle of Williamsburg, or Battle of Fort Magruder, finally ends with the onset of nightfall. The engagement around Williamsburg has ended in a tactical stalemate. The Union is unable to exploit the flank attack by Hancock, which McClellan had called superb, and Longstreet's command begins withdrawing from their fortifications overnight. Meanwhile, the last men of Brigadier General Kearny's 3rd Division and 3rd Corps begin settling into camp before Williamsburg as the rain starts to subside for the evening. The next morning, May 6, finds the rainstorms departing to the east, and the Confederates under Longstreet and Johnston, some men occupied by wives and families, depart to the northwest, up the Virginia Peninsula towards Richmond. With Williamsburg abandoned, the Federals move in to occupy the town. Casualties for the Battle of Williamsburg, the first pitched battle of the Peninsula Campaign, include 2,283 Union losses and 1,682 Confederate killed, wounded, captured, or missing during the May 5th engagement. Longstreet's rearguard action at Williamsburg has succeeded in buying time for the Confederates to continue the withdrawal to Richmond and its outlying fortifications. McClellan would set up a supply base in Williamsburg, as he had done at Yorktown, and continue the pursuit of Johnston's army up the peninsula. The first battle may be over, but the campaign for Richmond has only just begun.